Hello everyone! All the cards from Hearthstone's Journey to Unbound expansion have been revealed, and now is the best time to theorycraft decks for the upcoming release. So today in this video I want to take a look at Elemental Shaman. Blizzard has added a ton of new elementals into the game, and Elemental Shaman looks like it's probably the most straightforward curve-playing tribal deck to build there is in this new expansion. However, with the number of elementals added, you can actually make quite a few choices when building an Elemental Shaman deck. So let's take a look at what kind of elementals are available for Shaman and what kind of deck we could build from those. First up, there's the Glacial Shot. And I really like Glacial Shot. I think this is a pretty exciting new card. It's a 1-mana 2/1 elemental with a battle cry to freeze an enemy. So it can be useful both in the early game, where it can help stall the game out a little bit. Maybe it can even dictate the trade, perhaps by freezing the opponent's face it prevents being traded away with a weapon, something like that for example. And it can also be useful in the late game, because it can help dictate what trades take place, so overall a very interesting 1-drop. Although probably not quite as good as this one, the Firefly. Firefly is a 1-mana 1/2 elemental that adds another 1-mana 1/2 elemental into your hand. Unfortunately that one doesn't add a third one to your hand anymore. But still, it's 2 elementals in 1 card, so even though the body is not that strong, it's still going to be very useful in getting some more cards that help you activate those elemental synergies. And when we take a look at outside of Shaman, this is also going to be the card that every quest hunter is going to play, because hunter needs to play plenty of 1-drops, and this gives them 2 1-drops in 1 card. So overall I think this is the strongest 1-drop elemental in the set. Shaman also has its own class 1-drop, Air Elemental, a 1-mana 2/1 elemental that cannot be targeted by spells or hero powers. And that's a pretty interesting ability. We have seen from Fairy Dragon and we have seen from Sogot the Slitherer that this ability can sometimes be very powerful. However, I'm not quite as convinced about Air Elemental. I know that some people think it's going to be really good, but I think it's also going to be held back a little by that 1 health. Compared to the Fairy Dragon, for example, when Fairy Dragon comes down, let's say you're playing against a Druid or Rogue, they are very hesitant to start hitting their face into the Fairy Dragon and hit it multiple times in order to kill it. But this one with just 1 health, I just don't quite see it yet. But the ability can't be targeted by spells or hero powers, that is pretty strong, so there might be a way to use this card effectively. Volatile Elemental is a neutral 2-mana 1/1 elemental with a death rattle to deal 3 damage to a random enemy minion. While this might be able to do something for the board, in best case scenario it can even kill 2 minions if it can kill a 1 health minion and then use the death rattle to kill something else. But overall I'm not that convinced about Volatile Elemental. We have already seen basically that the Elemental Shaman deck is going to have pretty slow start. Those 1-drops were not that strong. They didn't multiply on the board immediately. It's no patches effect coming right there. So the Elemental Shaman will not have that very swift board development all the way from 1. And Volatile Elemental, it might be able to help you catch up, but on the other hand, it might also be too weak of a tempo play on 2 and leave you even further behind. Another option on 2 is also going to leave you behind, however, and that's Shaman's Feinbloom Harbinger. The Feinbloom Harbinger is Shaman class card. It's a 2-mana 1/1 elemental with a battle cry to reduce the cost of elementals in your hand by 1. So it's like the Emperor Elemental. It's actually really interesting. You want to be curving out, you have your hand. In Elemental Shaman you're probably going to have pretty poor card draw, so getting those discounts on the cards that you do have might enable you to work out a better way to curve them out and go forth and gain tempo, gain board control, win the game. Overall, I think this is a really strong card because that effect is so huge. It's also going to be a really bad top deck late in the game, but so would be most other options at this mana slot for Elemental Shaman. Then we have Tundle, a neutral 3-mana 3/3 beast with a battle cry: if you played an elemental last turn, adapt. Okay, so potentially you're looking at a fairly powerful minion played on 3. If you find from adapt, for example, you can play this as a 3/6. You might be able to play this as a 3/3 with a Divine Shield. You might be able to play this as a 4/4. Those are pretty powerful options. But there are some significant downsides to the card as well. It's not that impressive in the late game, and it breaks your elemental chain. It requires an elemental to have been played on the previous turn, but if you drop this on 3, you won't have an elemental to play to enable your 4-turn synergy card. So, given those considerations, I actually don't expect this one to see play. A far more powerful option to play on 3 when you're falling behind on board a little is the Tar Creeper. And Tar Creeper is a neutral 3-mana 1/5 elemental with taunt that has +2 attack on your opponent's turn. So on your opponent's turn, this is a Sentient Shieldmaster at 1 less mana, and Sentient Shieldmaster is already a good card, so this is incredible defensive value. On the offense, however, that 1 attack on your turn means that this is not going to do much, if anything. So overall, this shapes out the Elemental Shaman game plan. Survive the first couple of turns, start getting some taunts up on 3, then you start building yourself back into the game. It's a perfect fit for what Elemental Shaman wants to be doing, and it's the ideal card that they want to play on 3. Shaman also has its own class card choice for 3 though, which is the Hotspring Guardian, a 3-mana 2/4 elemental with taunt and battle cry to restore 3 health. I think this is a little bit weaker than the Tar Creeper generally, because it has 1 less health and also 1 less attack on your opponent's turn. I expect many Elemental Shaman decks to be running both, so that they will have 4 3-drops in the deck, just so that they ensure that they will find that taunt for turn 3 that they need. And Hotspring Guardian can be somewhat useful later in the game as well, thanks to the healing effect. It's not a big healing effect, but you can target that either on yourself or on one of your minions, so it can still allow for some pretty nice plays later in the game. The final competitor for the 3-mana slot is the Igneous Elemental. It's a neutral 3-mana 2/3 elemental that as a death rattle adds 2 1/2 elementals to your hand. So overall, this card can be pretty powerful. It can add you 2 more elemental activators. Depending on whether your deck needs more elemental activators, whether you run stuff that requires you to have a lot of those, this might be an option. On the other hand, in Shaman I see that this card is outclassed currently by the 2 taunt cards. Because you're falling behind, you need to start catching up, and a 2/3 for 3 is such a weak tempo play. That means that you will have a ton of catching up to do on 4 if you go for this. I can still see this being experimented on and given a try, but currently I would rate the taunt cards stronger than this one. When we head to the 4-mana slot, we come to one of the big power plays, the Tol'Vir Stoneshaper. It's a neutral 4-mana 3/5 with a battle cry that if you played an elemental on the previous turn, it will gain taunt and divine shield. So it's a better Sentient Shieldmaster essentially. If you have played an elemental on the previous turn, this is a 3/5 taunt with divine shield for 4. Same stats as Sentient Shieldmaster, plus a divine shield on top. Very, very powerful defensive option. It is worth noting though that you pay some kind of a price for this high power, because the Tol'Vir Stoneshaper itself is not an elemental, so it breaks your elemental chain, which means that if you drop this on 4, then on 5 you will not be able to play an elemental synergy card. The other option for that 4 mana slot, which is a little bit weaker but does have the elemental tag, is the Fibril Phoenix. The Fibril Phoenix is a neutral 4 mana 3/3 elemental with a battle cry to deal 2 damage. I'm not a big fan of Fibril Phoenix, to be honest. That 3/3 stat line for 4 is just so weak. And there are a ton of minions on 4 that have 3 or more attack and have 4 or more health, which means that the Fibril Phoenix trades very inefficiently with them. Unless of course you hit them first with the battle cry and then you hope that you get the trade or something. The battle cry does also enable you to kill off something, so let's say you have played a Dark Reaper on 3, maybe the opponent has been able to attack into it with something that has survived, so you can use the Fibril Phoenix to finish that off. So it has its upsides. Overall it's not one of my favorite cards, but looking at the cards available for the deck, I expect Fibril Phoenix to see a lot of play. And there are basically only 2 viable choices for the 4-drop. These Tol'Vir Stoneshaper and the Fibril Phoenix, and there's room in the deck to run both, so why not? For the 5 mana slot we have the Servant of Kalimos, and this is yet another big card for the Elemental tribe. It's a neutral 5 mana 4/5 elemental with a battle cry that if you played an elemental last turn, discover an elemental. And discover is a really powerful mechanic. And what does it mean to discover an elemental? When played on Shaman, it means that you're offered Shaman class elementals with a higher priority and neutral elementals with a lower priority. And Shaman has quite some good elementals going for it, so you're very likely to be able to pick up something really good from Servant of Kalimos. And also because the deck seems to have some problems with card draw, this kind of resource generation instead of direct card draw is extremely valuable substitute. It's worth noting that if you drop the Tol'Vir Stoneshaper on 4, you broke your elemental chain and then you cannot play the Servant of Kalimos on 5. So that is a bit of an issue sometimes, but overall Servant of Kalimos can give you a huge value at any point of the game, so I don't see it as that much of a problem. Continuing with neutral elementals, we have the Frozen Crusher. It's a 6 mana 8/8 elemental that freezes itself after it attacks. So in practice the Frozen Elemental is only able to attack every other turn. To be honest, I don't think this card is worth playing with that downside. You get a bunch of good stats, yes, for the cost, but the downside is pretty huge. And the cost is not that low, so if you think outside of the Elemental Shaman box and you start thinking, okay, maybe I want to play some kind of silence deck, silence away the downside, then 6 mana 8 is not what that kind of deck is looking for. It's not good enough, so I don't expect the Frozen Crusher to see any play. Then we come to the 7 mana slot, and the neutral 7 mana elemental is Stromwatcher, a 7 mana 4/8 elemental with Windfury. So that's a pretty big body that's going to hit twice. However, experience so far has shown that none of these high cost, low attack, high health Windfury minions have seen any play. I don't expect the Stromwatcher to see any play. Luckily, there are stronger options for the 7 mana slot. For Shaman, they have another class card here, the Shaman 7 mana 4/4 elemental Stone Sentinel, that has a battle cry: if you played an elemental last turn, summon 2 2/3 elementals with Taunt. So if you have played an elemental on the previous turn, you are putting down 8/10 worth of stats divided over 3 bodies for 7 mana. And I believe this card is strong enough to see play. It has some weakness against the area of effect damage, but still that's a lot of stats to put on the board. However, the strongest elemental for the 7 mana slot is actually a neutral, and this card is nuts. Blazecaller, 7 mana 6/6 elemental with a battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, deal 5 damage. Same cost as Violence Portal, check. Same damage as Violence Portal, check. Always summon a 6/6 body. What? I mean, this is going to be an automatic 2-off in all Elemental Shaman decks. This card is insane. Shaman does have its own class elemental at the top of the curve as well. The Shaman legendary minion for Journey to Un'Goro. Kalimos, Primal Lord. And 8 mana 7/7 elemental with a battle cry that if you played an elemental last turn, cast an elemental invocation. And this card is also nuts. I mean, there are some really powerful cards in the elemental deck. Kalimos, you're probably going to be able to activate the elemental invocation. There are 4 elemental invocations and you can freely choose from among them which one you want to cast. So you can either deal 3 damage to all enemy minions, and only enemy minions, not your own. Or fill your board with 1/1 elementals, restore 12 health to your hero, or deal 6 damage to the enemy hero. This card is insanely good. I've also reviewed Kalimos before in full, so if you want to see me talk and praise Kalimos more, then you can head over to that video. There is one more new elemental card, and that's Ozruk, the neutral 9 mana legendary minion, a 5/5 elemental with taunt and a battle cry to gain +5 health for each elemental you played last turn. Here it's important to know that it's played and not summoned. So if you play Kalimos and you summon the board full of 1/1 elementals, that still only counts as 1 elemental played. Kalimos was the only card that you actually played. So that reduces the power of the effect quite a bit. Essentially, if you have only played 1 elemental on the previous turn, then Ozruk will be a 9 mana 5/10 taunt. It's a more expensive Ancient of War in that case. It starts to get good when you play 2 or more. With 2 elementals it's a 5/15, with 3 elementals it's a 5/20. These start to get into figures that the opponent has to have a hard removal if they ever want to kill Ozruk. However, I don't think Ozruk is going to be an automatic inclusion in all elemental decks. You probably want to be running some kind of an elemental deck that has plenty of cheap activators if you want to use Ozruk. So you could use the Igneous Elemental, for example. You get more of those 1 mana elementals so that you can make a really big Ozruk. And I can see that could be a viable play style. However, with the 9 mana cost, if you sacrifice a lot of tempo early on to build up your activator base, then Ozruk at 9 might not be enough to save you. It can have its moments, but I don't expect it to be an automatic inclusion. There are also 18 old cards that are going to receive the elemental tag in the new expansion. Some of those cards are only available in Wild, some of them are class cards. So there are 6 cards that are relevant for our considerations about an Elemental Shaman. There's the Unbound Elemental, which is a Shaman class card, but I think Unbound Elemental is unlikely to see play in an Elemental deck, because Elemental decks generally do not have a lot of Overload cards, and Unbound Elemental is an Overload synergy card, so I don't think it's strong enough to see play. There is one Overload card that you could run with Unbound Elemental if you wanted to, which is the Earth Elemental. And that is a strong card, I have to admit. So I could see Earth Elemental seeing play, even though that 3 Overload is a pretty hefty price to pay. At least one of the old elementals I'm fairly confident is going to see a lot of play. I think it's an automatic inclusion. That's the Fire Elemental. The Fire Elemental has seen a lot of play before in midrange Shaman. It has fallen out of favor recently, especially with the Jades coming and everything. But it's still a really good card. Now with the Elemental tag added, you can play Fire Elemental on 6 into Blazecaller on 7. The damage. There's just so much damage. I mean, that's a really great fit. Another high potential fit for Elemental Shaman deck is Alkir the Windlord, a classic mid-range Shaman finisher. There may be some issues with this, however. If you're not running Rockbiter, if you're not running Flametongue Totem, if you're not running Bloodlust, then the power of Alkir as a finisher is diminished a little bit. So I'm not completely sure whether it fits all Elemental Shaman decks, but it's definitely a strong contender. Another very strong card from the classic set is Baron Geddon. But Baron Geddon, while it's a strong card on its own, I don't really see it being a good fit for Elemental Shaman. Because Elemental Shaman at this point, Baron Geddon is a 7 mana card, already tries to have the board, contest the board. So Baron Geddon's effect that deals damage to the entire board is generally not a good match. Maybe you can build some kind of Elemental Shaman that would have use for Geddon, but the most straightforward specimens of the archetype seem to be unable to run that very effectively. Finally, there is the neutral card Frost Elemental. Frost Elemental is an interesting card. Its effect as a battlecry to freeze a character is pretty powerful. You can stall the game. You can dictate trades, but still overall it has seen quite little play in Constructed. It has seen a lot of play in Arena. But in Constructed, Frost Elemental has seen occasional play, but that 5/5 stat line for 6 generally has not been enough to justify the effect. And when it comes to Shaman deck, there's also the further issue that it's competing directly in the same mana slot as Fire Elemental, so it's probably going to lose that battle. I don't expect Frost Elemental to see a lot of play in Elemental Shaman, but it might see play in some other Elemental decks, with the tag added. So now that we have taken a look at all of the Elementals and the Elemental Synergy cards, what kind of Elemental Shaman could we build? And here is a list that I have put together. This is my initial draft of what an Elemental Shaman could look like. The game plan of the deck looks crystal clear. The first turns will be weak. From turn 3 on, the taunts will help you stabilize, and then you have all these powerful battlecry minions that come on the board and wreak havoc. And then you start to turn the board into your favor and overwhelm the opponent. There can be multiple ways on how to go about fulfilling this plan. One of the things that I really tried to work into this deck is Totem Synergy. One of the most powerful Shaman cards as of late has been Thing from Below. The Thing from Below is an immense tempo swing. If you in the late game you can drop 1 or even 2 Things from Below for free, in addition to whatever else you did on the turn, then that's giving you that very powerful swing turn. So having Thing from Below would have been really nice. But if I want to have Thing from Below, I would need to have some totems. There are no totems in the deck. So the most potential ones are Flametongue Totem and Manatide Totem. Well, with Flametongue Totem looks somewhat attractive even, because let's say you have these fairly weak early game minions, and if you drop down a Flametongue Totem, then those minions will be able to trade up. However, it looks likely that in the early game, when you play your minions, they are going to get immediately traded away, so you will not actually have a chance to drop a Flametongue Totem and benefit from that. Also, because you're playing quite a lot on curve, then you will not have the opportunity to squeeze in that 2 mana to play that Flametongue Totem on the board. Then there's the Manatide Totem, and it has some of the same issues. Okay, you have these pretty strong taunts coming up from 3 on, so it's actually quite attractive to be able to drop a Manatide Totem behind this taunt, hiding there, drawing you cards. That sounds really good. But because in the early game you're still in the process of stabilizing, then fitting in this Manatide Totem, giving up all the tempo when you play Manatide Totem instead of something else on the turn, that just seems like a price that the Elemental Shaman can ill afford to pay. Manatide Totem would be the easiest one of these to fit in a deck, because if you want the Thing from Below, you probably want the Flametongue and the Manatide. Flame Tongue might not work. So okay, there's still the option that maybe you can go for card draw with just the Mana Tide Totem, maybe even just one copy. And that is something that could be considered. Would there be a way to fit in one copy of Mana Tide Totem, for example, in the deck, to improve the card draw a little bit? That's something that future tweaking might reveal. Because without Mana Tide Totems and without Azure Drakes, which are rotating out, the card draw of Elemental Shaman is pretty abysmal. Obviously you have the Servant of Kalimos, which is generating you more resources. In this deck list I have chosen to include a Blood Mage Talnos, because I believe Blood Mage Talnos is a key card in allowing you to fully stabilize. It gives you that spell damage boost, so if you're running, like in this deck, there's Maelstrom Portal and there's Lightning Storm, which are the two top candidates for an area of effect spell. So Talnos accompanied with these can give you that swing turn you need. We could in addition consider something else like a Volcano, for example. The problem with Volcano is that at 5 mana, it's coming down when you're in the process of stabilizing, and you might even have some kind of a board yourself. And if you play it on 5, even if it clears the entire board, you cede the initiative to the opponent. The opponent will develop on his turn, you will be overloaded by 2 on your turn, and you will have also broken your elemental chain. I have a bit of a hard time seeing how Volcano supports your plan, because it's also going to take away your own board, and even if it doesn't, it generally cedes the initiative to the opponent. Instead of Volcano, I have chosen to include one copy of Devolve. Devolve can be really great. It can break synergies. Let's say your opponent is playing pirates. They have some pirates on the board, they have a South Sea Captain on the board. You devolve them, all the synergies gone, all the minions are going to be really small because they're generally pretty cheap anyway. Also, if your opponent is playing big minions, they're playing Bittertide Hydra, Flamebreath Faceless, these sort of big piles of stats that are heavily undercosted, then devolving those to a lower cost minion generally makes them a lot worse. And if the Paladin Legendary Quest and Galvadon never become a thing, well, Devolve is your answer to that one too. It's also an answer to Living Mana. So Devolve is a very flexible card that can really break your opponent's game plan. So I have chosen to include one copy in the deck because of that. I have also chosen to include one copy of Glacial Shot to fill up that early curve. Give me some more options for that one drop. And Glacial Shot is also a good card in the late game because of the freeze effect, so it can help stall at any point of the game, it can help dictate trades. Overall, a flexible card that I think is worthy of one spot in the deck. There are also a number of elementals that I have chosen not to include, but that could see play in some other lists. I'm thinking of cards like Air Elemental, Igneous Elemental, Earth Elemental, Alkir the Windlord and Ozruk. So it's actually quite fascinating that even though Elemental Shaman seems to be the most straightforward deck to build, but there are actually quite a few decisions to make, still even in this limited space, because there are more elementals than you can fit into the deck. You can think about what kind of non-elemental cards would you like to be running. You can choose the style, whether you want to play elementals that generate a lot of other small elementals, or whether you go for bigger and more powerful ones. So even though Elemental Shaman seems to be a very straightforward deck to build, there are actually quite a few decisions to make, and I expect to see a lot of variation in the early days before the final list is being figured out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.